this week, General Motors EVs now have access to the Tesla Supercharger network, thus doubling the number of fast charger options in North America. I'll be keeping close tabs on GM's CEO Mary Barrett as he or she starts retweeting pro-Nazi memes as a result.
Interesting. Australia has so much rooftop solar they need a kill switch to turn it off when there's too much power on the grid. Or they could just borrow James's tanning bed and use all that energy while getting a nice, healthy glow.
The 3 Mile Island nuclear facility in the United States is getting a new life, Brian. Its accident in the late 70s arguably caused the end of the nuclear era's momentum. Now Microsoft wants it all to themselves to power AI. Guess if they figured out it can survive a meltdown, it can handle Windows updates. And you know what? AI wrote that joke. I'm not kidding.
Oh, that's why it was so funny.
I gave it a shot, and it was better than anything I could come up with. I'm mad. See, we're done. We're done.
Yikes. Well, this one I wrote myself. A $1 billion solar plus battery storage project just broke ground in Utah. There is no truth to the rumor that this project was needed to freeze the ice for Utah's new NHL hockey team.
All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show.
All right, so, and many other fabulous stories coming up. So, I'm off on a trip tomorrow. We're heading to Milwaukee for a few days, but I won't miss any shows or anything. We're expected to be back on Monday. But I'm slightly worried we're going to miss a connection on the way home. So if I miss a connection on the way home, then the podcast will be a day late.
All right. And why are we going to Milwaukee again? Just 'cause?
Just because we were trying to go there on our road trip to Indiana because it was kind of on the way. But we realized it was sort of too much to jam into one trip. But after we kind of looked into Milwaukee and some of the things we could see, we thought, you know what, let's book a trip. We're staying at the fabulous Pfister Hotel, which opened in 1890 or something. So crazy old hotel.
Seems primed to might burn down, don't you think? Any day now.
Nah, if it's been there that long, it should be fine. But, they've got a cool art museum, and we're going to be able to catch a couple of films at the Milwaukee Documentary Film Festival, which just kind of happened to be on when we
well, that's lucky.
Yeah, so that's fun. They got a couple of cool old cinemas downtown. But speaking of movies, our friend Lowell has a movie coming out, and I wanted to give it a plug.
I thought we should do that as well. It opens on Friday in Canada, and I think October 10th in the United States.
Yeah, we'll mention it again. But yeah, Canada in theaters this Friday, September 27th. And then, U.S. and worldwide in October. So we might mention it again then. But yeah, it's called Die Alone. And did you see it? We had a special preview here.
No, I did not see it yet. I'm going to pay money to actually see it with a regular audience. I know they had a cast screening. I was not involved in the film, by the way. You consulted on it, but I did not see it yet at all.
Yeah, I didn't do much. I looked at a rough cut at one point. But man, it's a fantastic movie. It is so great. I think you're going to love it.
And this is from our buddy who did Wolf Cop. He's known for that because it was such a catchy name and concept and weird and funny that everyone sort of remembers him for that forever. That was his big break into directing feature films. He actually won a contest to do that, which we sort of worked on to help him jump through all those hoops. But yeah, they picked that, and he's directed many feature films since then. He's one of these days he's got 2 feature films coming out this year. One of these days he's going to be like the most prolific Canadian director there is with number of films, because Canadian directors, unless they go to Hollywood, even if they do, it seems to slow down because it takes even famous directors take like 10 years to get a film out because they have to get funding together. And so he has 2 films coming out this year. He's known as a genre filmmaker, but maybe you could tell us that this isn't really terribly genre specific because it's mostly a story, right? About
it is a post-apocalyptic zombie movie, so let's get that clear.
It's just kind of background, though, isn't it? That's how I sort of gathered from the trailer.
It's like a zombie movie with a heart. It's really fabulous and extremely rare for a Canadian film to get a release in Canadian theaters because we're so inundated with American movies that Canadian movies rarely get a chance. But yeah, this one is coming out Friday, and everyone should go see it, and go see it on the opening weekend, because, you know, it may not get that long in theaters because it is a Canadian film. So if you're going to go see it, see it this weekend.
Definitely see it in the first week of release when you're seeing a film like this.
Yeah. But anyway, the other reason I wanted to mention it was about a dozen years ago, I was trying to come up with feature film ideas, and I had a few things kind of going, and I eventually abandoned most of them and then made The Sabbatical, the movie that you and I made together. But one of the ideas I had at the time, about a dozen years ago, it was going to be a post-apocalyptic movie, much different than Lowell's, but it was going to be post-apocalyptic and shot here in Saskatchewan, which is exactly what Lowell did. And at one point in the process, I was thinking to myself, and I never got very far with this, I never wrote a full script or anything, but, you know, it was an interesting idea. And I thought to myself, you know what? I should get Carrie-Anne Moss to star in this.
Is that right?
I think she would be perfect for it. And that's exactly what Lowell did. His movie's different than mine, but it's post-apocalyptic. He got Carrie-Anne Moss to star in it, Frank Grillo as well.
Do you want to give us a background on Carrie-Anne Moss?
From The Matrix. Everyone would know her from The Matrix. She's from Vancouver. Okay.
So yeah, that's pretty exciting. His other film, he was actually disappointed in this one because it didn't pick up at film festivals. They didn't know what to make of it. If it was a genre film, the genre festivals would have taken it. If it was a dramatic film, your Sundances and things like that and everything below that might have had a look at it. But yeah, he's kind of disappointed that it didn't get any festival buzz. So but it is coming out in theaters. His other film, on the other hand, is more genre. It's about a pro wrestling, and it's like 84% on Rotten Tomatoes right now, and well-received film as well. But it's crazy that he has two films coming out in 1 year. But yeah, we've got to plug our friends. He is a close friend of ours. We're not just fooling around here. Brian, the co-op chargers, I was talking about them because, we live in a charging desert here in the prairies of Canada, and I don't drive a Tesla. I'm not a mover and shaker like yourself, so I do not have a Tesla. And these things are important to me and many other people. I read about them on our Facebook EV groups. So yeah, they actually replaced them all. You know how we're talking about a lot about how charger reliability outside of the Tesla network sucks. Like it's just atrocious sometimes.
So these are all the co-op chargers that we had here in Western Canada.
Yeah, I mean, there was one on one of the routes to your lake via the number 1 highway in Whitewood that has been down, some people claim, for almost a year. Well, it's replaced now with new Flow technology, which is my favorite brand, by the way, because they are reliable and because I can plug and charge on them. And yeah, they replaced the one here where we live. They replaced the one in Moose Jaw, which I use when I go west on the way back. I seem to need, because you just need it. I always seem to need to stop there. So it's nice to have that. It's a backup, and it's also my preferred charging. It's also good prices. So yeah, Moose Jaw, Whitewood, and Medicine Hat, which is the biggest charging desert that I know of, that I deal with, is Medicine Hat, because yeah, they hardly have anything. It's a major city in a major province in Canada, in Alberta, and it's got squat for hardly anything. And yeah, so that co-op I've used the first time last year. This year it wasn't available. Now it's up and running, and I could just plug it in and walk away, which is lovely. It'll charge me based on my car, and I tested that out for the co-op people here in Regina, and they're quite pleased with how everything's working. I'm ecstatic about it, and yeah, so that's just great. My son mentioned that he's taking a pavement class because he's in civil engineering. So it's weird to say that. I mean, we've taken some odd classes in film school, but he's taking a pavement class.
Wow, I didn't know that was a thing.
It is, and it's pretty important. He's in third or fourth. I don't know if it's a third or fourth year class, but he's kind of in a hybrid right now. And the guy said that he was interested in highway charging, which I've ridiculed. So I told my son, I'll come speak to your class and set him straight. And he kind of got scared by that idea and said, no, Dad. Yeah. Anyway, that's really all I had to talk about. He's going on a tour of the Boundary Dam, not the Boundary Dam, the dam at Douglas Provincial Park. What's it called? Diefenbaker Dam. Mm-hmm. They're loading up a couple buses full of engineering students going out there. And I have huge questions about, how dams can be used for storage, like shutting them down in the daytime when you have lots of solar. Not that we do here because we're stupid, but a lot of places can use, I'm fascinated by using dams as a battery, basically.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondered how it varies from dam to dam and what that one would be like, because there is a lot of hydro in Canada. And if we can use that as battery storage before we one day replace all that with, non-hydro, it would be nice. But I guess there's, homes along the reservoir so that you can't raise it too much, and they also need to keep a flow. He mentioned ice would be a problem, and that's something I hadn't thought about. Storing water in a cold climate might be different than doing it, but they do it in Europe a lot. So, but the water freezes fast here. It could freeze fast if it was if the flow stopped in minus 40 or something. Yeah. So that's something to consider, and I don't know if you'll get any questions in, but certainly something I'm interested in.
All right. According to the script, you have more to say about
that never materialized. Sorry. You see, the Canadian Prime Minister was on Colbert last night, and he was in Washington to talk about the climate, and he didn't. He didn't talk about it on Colbert, so I don't have a clip.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go to Australia now. This is from Renew Economy, and we talk about Australia all the time because, of course, they have tons of rooftop solar. They have traditionally kind of high electricity prices, but they've tweaked the regulations such that it's easy for people to get solar on their rooftops. But they do have a problem now when there's not enough demand on the grid. So they also have large battery storage for the grid in Australia. And they really just have to work out protocols to shut this stuff off because there is so much rooftop solar now, 21 gigawatts of rooftop solar on homes and businesses in Australia. And so you just run into situations where super sunny day, you may have too much power on the grid. And so this is the Australian Energy Market Operator. They're the ones in charge of this, and they're looking to introduce new protocols to deal with this. So they have already in recent years, they've instituted new inverter standards and protocols for people who do put rooftop solar on. And this basically allows them to be shut off if necessary, because having too much power on the grid can be a bit of a problem. And but they don't really want to do that because, the people that own all of those houses and solar panels don't like that. It could be, just a rapid cutoff. And then, of course, then they have to pay for their power from the grid. And they're not making money with excess solar, which is usually what happens on a sunny day like that. You can sell it back to the grid. So they're looking at maybe shutting off the batteries instead, the large grid storage batteries, whereby if there's going to be too much power on the grid, they're going to make sure that these large grid storage batteries are drained overnight and kept at zero, so that if there is a peak during the day with too much power, all of those batteries can suck up the excess. And
zero seems extreme, though. Why not 5 or 10%? Just so you can use it to stabilize the grid. And also, you don't want to keep batteries at zero anymore, on a grid storage than you do on a EV battery. So why not, mostly drained? And wouldn't that make sense, right? I mean, if you could forecast a lot of solar for the day, you would want them drained. So I don't know why that's such a big issue, but I wouldn't want them to go to zero because you need grid stability. You need them to respond quickly to things.
It does say zero in the article, but I assume there's going to be some nuance to all of this. But the idea being that instead of shutting off everybody's rooftop solar, which would make everybody mad, they're going to shut off these big batteries instead. And they're going to introduce a compensation for this. So again, the problem is no one likes their solar being shut off. No one likes their batteries being shut off because they stop making money from the grid, because you make money every time you supply power to the grid. So they're going to compensate these big batteries in a similar way where they will actually get paid to keep the batteries at zero or, perhaps close to zero.
Well, that's one of these struggles that we're going to have to deal with going with higher renewables on the grid. And like we always say, it's not going to be the same grid with different sources of energy. It's going to be a different kind of grid. There's going to be demand response. There's going to be EVs that will suck up power and give it off as needed, and things like that. Vehicle to grid, V2G, and things like that. All kinds of things, variable things, adjustable things.
The grids just have to work differently. And now they're having a discussion about nuclear as well in Australia, like we are in Canada, and there are some proponents of adding more nuclear to the grid. But in especially 10 years from now, if they ever get built, it'll be 10 years from now. And just imagine how much solar is going to be on the grid by then, because it's still growing.
Then you got to turn the nuclear off, Brian.
And you got to turn the nuclear off.
That's a bigger deal than turning off a battery, because if the nuclear is not pumping out at 90% capacity, then the cost of it goes up even higher, and it's already high. It's already non-competitive. So that's going to be a tricky situation. And there's going to be some growing pains. We can see that. But you know what? I think most of it will be figured out in the next 8 years, something like that.
Yeah, it's not a thing that happens overnight. We have time to solve these problems.
But Australia will be on the forefront of it, and we'll have to learn from what they do and what other people do who are reaching this milestone quicker. GM, General Motors, one of the world's biggest car companies, is getting access with all their EVs. They were an EV pioneer in some ways with the EV1 25 years ago. Then they crushed them all. But they did come out with the Bolt in 2015, which was the first affordable long-range EV, just prior to the Model 3, a year or two later.
Yep. And the Chevy Volt before that, which was a very decent plug-in hybrid.
Yeah, with lots of range and an engine for a backup. So there's lots of Bolts out there, right? There's lots of them around, and now they have access to the network, although Bolts are a 2015 technology and they charge slow. And I have one, by the way, if you didn't know that.
Yeah, and this is access to the Tesla network, just to be clear. Tesla is slowly opening it up, kind of manufacturer by manufacturer.
Right, and Ford was first, and then Rivian, and now GM. And those two manufacturers sent out free adapters because it's a different plug standard in North America, where the Tesla has a very elegant, it's almost like my one in the driveway, and to get superpower. Literally, I'm the only one in the family who can handle the supercharging cable because it's so heavy and awkward that you need a great, and I don't know that I would if I was 90 years old, it's really, I got to get you out to try one because you'll never know if you don't do that once, because it's really crazy. And so the automakers are virtually all going to the Tesla standard. Tesla's opened it up so that they can do that. And we'll start seeing it next year and the year after that with cars actually having it built in. So they'll have access to the supercharger network, which doubles the amount of supercharger access virtually. And it's a much better thing, but now we need an adapter. So unfortunately, GM is making us pay for the adapters, which is not great for James. I'm not happy about that. I thought, well, if the other people do it, it would be something that GM could do, but they look kind of bad doing it this way. The announcement comes more than 15 months after GM first announced it would adopt Tesla's EV charging plug for its vehicles. The automaker had originally said it expected to complete the software coordination with Tesla by early spring 2024, but production bottlenecks and layoffs at Tesla have delayed the process. Nearly 18,000 Tesla Superchargers in North America now are accessible by people like me with a GM vehicle, EV. GM customers have to pay for their adapter, $310 Canadian, $225 United States currency, which is a chunk. It's a chunk. It's probably more than what the thing is worth, which some people are kind of mad about. I cannot justify it myself. I'm going to explain why. Tom Malogny of State of Charge argued maybe they shouldn't be free because not everyone wants one. Some people just use their EVs for the city, so why have that bottleneck of giving, waiting, everyone else waiting? So that slows things down. There's a possibility of waste there too. So maybe he suggested if it was subsidized, I'd gladly pay $100 for it, but that's a bit much for my case scenario. If anyone has one from Ford and Rivian that they're not using, contact my agent, and that would be Brian. I don't know. Just contact him. I'll explain why I may not need one. this is my analysis, Brian. I've done some analysis on how useful this is in our charging desert of the prairies of Canada. You might have a charging desert where you are. Chances are you do somewhere near. With us, the faster charging availability that we have of non-Tesla networks are often broken. In fact, we did an analysis that 9 out of 10 of them were broken or in questionable repair. Sometimes they work, but they only give out a little bit of juice, a tenth of what they can give out, supposedly. So I have the Bolt EV from GM. It is, like I say, 2015 technology. It's discontinued. They are bringing it back, hopefully with faster charging, but mine only does 55 kilowatts. So if I wanted to charge my car from 0 to 100 at one of these superchargers, so it would probably take like 2 hours. If I went from 0 to 80%, it would probably take about an hour and 50 minutes, which is a long time. But usually I spend around 50 minutes to an hour charging a major charge when I'm on a road trip, by the way. So I'm never empty, and I'm never necessarily going to fill it further than I need. So I did an analysis with a better route planner without live weather. No, I did use live weather because I still have access to that account. So it does have live weather. It's cool here now and windy when I did this test yesterday. Okay, so that adds a little bit of challenge to it. So it's kind of like consider it, not ideal, but not really unideal, kind of somewhere in the middle. And basically, if I use the Tesla network to Calgary, it would be the same as if I didn't, Brian. So it would be exactly the same because my vehicle charges slowly. So the advantage comes when you have a faster charging EV, which is basically everyone else. Some of them charge a lot faster than others. Some are like 3 times the peak of me. Sometimes they are 5 times like yourself. Like the peak charging rate is about 250 instead of 150 or 50 in my case. So Tom Milani did test the Bolt on the network, and it charges the same as anywhere else. It peaks at 54, has the same sort of charging curve. Nothing is different on the Tesla network. There's no risk of the adapter getting hot because it can handle a lot more than what the Bolt does. So, with the Tesla version 3 superchargers, they are about 250. Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, 255 is the most I've gotten.
And CCS, that's the other version that's not Tesla with the big awkward adapters. They are usually 50, 100, and 150, and sometimes 350 at Petro-Canada here, which is a gas station company, and Electrify Canada / Electrify America, which go to 350, but there's not those Electrify Canada stations outside my city. They're basically not along the highway. They're in the cities right now, and it would be nice if they weren't. So in the country, in the small cities, the small towns, you got to charge with other places. So the place that I could use it the most would be on the road to Saskatoon, where my son goes to school, and it's a common city to go to here. That's a V2 supercharger that I'm told, and it is sure enough not showing up as a viable charger for my GM vehicle in the Tesla app. And by the way, GM wants you to use the GM app, which is clunky and stupid and idiotic at best. It is. Many of these apps are dumb, and that's why Tesla has an advantage. But you can use the Tesla app. If you make an account with Tesla, you don't have to have a Tesla. I have an account with Tesla, and I added my credit card info to them, and you can easily just charge. And it's faster. It takes 4 seconds with a Tesla, 6 seconds. Yeah. And it's like 26 seconds with a GM. So why would you do it? That just GM gets a cut, or they don't have to, you don't have to worry about you looking at another automaker's brand name while you're doing it. But definitely, if you're out there and you have a GM vehicle, use the Tesla app if you don't already know that. So I tested out the Mustang Mach-E, which is a very common car from Ford. I did the long-range version. This is my day trip from here to Calgary that I always use as a test through the charging desert. It was 54 minutes of charging if you use the Supercharger network, and over an hour longer, though, if you had to use the other network. That is what is currently online at this moment in time. It would take an hour longer, or basically twice as long charging. So that is really significant. Doesn't do anything for me in my Bolt, but for most cars like the Mach-E, it is a huge advantage, Brian, and you have to pay a lot more on the Tesla network, but I'm guessing that people would rather spend, 54 minutes instead of an hour and 54 minutes charging if they had that option. Now, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, I have a friend who has one of those, and It is the rear-wheel drive long range that I tested. It was 39 minutes using the Supercharger network and an hour and 16 minutes not using it. That's 37 minutes longer, also twice as long. By the way, Hyundai does not have access to the Supercharger network yet, but the app is letting you test that out to see how it would be in advance. The Ford F-150 Lightning extended range pickup truck, I don't think that's quite the longest range that I tested out. It was an hour and 12 minutes on the Supercharger network and an hour and 55 on without it. So not as extreme, but still significant enough to make a huge difference. The Rivian R1T was 22 minutes on the Tesla network. It charges much faster than the Ford, more efficient than the Ford, and an hour and 17. If the Petro-Canada chargers are broken, which they usually are, it would be 22 minutes to an hour, like an hour longer, like significantly longer, ridiculous, like 6 times longer almost, you know, like many, many, many times longer. And I've got a link to the State of Charge video that Tom Maloney did on the network. He got early access by GM, and there was some false information out there. If you have a Bolt EV, you do not need to take it to the dealership for a software update. There was a miscommunication by GM. There was some question about 19 and 20 models, but apparently everyone out there who's testing it says no problem. So it seems like no Bolt needs a software update. And I just wanted to mention that. Let's get into the mailbag. Go ahead.
So you probably won't take a road trip until next summer. So I imagine what you'll have to do is, again, take a look at the charging desert and see how much it's improved, because peace of mind would be the reason for you to get the adapter. If, you know, it still looks like the non-Tesla chargers look kind of dodgy next summer.
If I had my druthers and I had a fat bank account, I would definitely get an adapter right away, and I would use it as a backup, as you know, but I wouldn't use it anyway because it doesn't charge faster for me, and it costs twice as much, or 50% more, or something like that. So there'd be no incentive for me to do that because of the cost. And yeah, let's dip into the mailbag now. This is from Paul. A couple of weeks ago, James had mentioned or asked why we can't get those cheap Chinese EVs. I concurred with that, but I just read the following article from Reuters, and all I could think of was a horrifying sci-fi that could be very well become reality. By the way, love the show. Thank you. Thank you for writing in. We appreciate everyone who writes in. He says this article, yeah, Brian Biden is floating the idea of banning Chinese software in vehicles. I'm going to give you some thoughts before I get your opinion on it, though. China, I think, would argue that we're a bunch of racists who don't want their country to do well. They are now kind of becoming the world leader, the superpower of record, especially when it comes to technology. We've been sending our vehicles out with our software to them for decades, and, you know, we haven't spied on them with our software, although software is certainly becoming different. I think Biden worries that, you know, all the self-driving tech in cars now, that China could monitor where these vehicles are going. We'll also have connected cars with cellular. Yeah, that's a possible thing, and they are a adversary, I guess. They would argue that we're making them an adversary and we're just scared of them. But yeah, it is a concern when someone in the country does that. But America is usually the country that has been doing that forever, and we just sort of live with it, and now we're not really wanting to live it when someone else takes over that role. I worry about Tesla robotaxis one day being run by Musk. I've mentioned this on the show. You've disagreed, but I think he could have a dispute with the government or something. You know, he's a child man now, impulsive. He could shut down the network or threaten to shut it down for a day or something like that, just to get his way, or to, it would cause absolute economic chaos in North America if that happened. And yeah, maybe we shouldn't be reliant on someone in China doing that either. But I'm certain that there can be safeguards put in place, and, you know, things like that. Perhaps Chinese vehicles might be made to run Google like GM is doing, or something like that. You know, I think it's overblown. I think, you know, our cell phones are made in China. We're scared of you know, Chinese technology in our telecommunication systems here. I kind of get that, but we're walking around with Chinese-made, at least assembled, you know, cell phones. So we're going to have to accept that China is now by far the world leader in technology advancement. It seems to be that America might have some wins, but it's going to be dwarfed by all the things that China's doing, I think.
Yeah, I ordered one of the new iPhones. The 16 just came out. It's actually going to be delivered today, and of course, it's shipped directly from China because that's how they do it. You order the phone and you track it all the way from China.
Now the Chinese know where you live.
Well, exactly. Of course, there's been all the kerfuffle about TikTok, same kinds of issues. And yeah, I tend to think it's overblown. I mean, all kinds of software from all kinds of people is all basically spying on us in some way.
Mr. Zuckerberg is one of them, and I don't care for that. He just wants us all to accept it. No, I don't accept it. I'm too old to accept it.
Yeah, but, it's all complicated and nuanced, and I couldn't possibly begin to figure out any kind of solution.
Okay. Well, do you worry about anything else? I mean, do you think that there's a solution that we could be doing? Anything at all?
Well, like a lot of these things, typically there is already rules and regulations in place. So, if some foreign power is spying on us through our phones, there's probably already a mechanism in place to deal with it. It's a matter of figuring it out who's doing it and enforcing it. This stuff's we've been inundated with technology for decades now, and it's going to take a few more decades for everything to kind of shake out and figure out how we deal with this. The laws often fall behind the technology. The technology comes first, and then, once we've had it for a while, then we figure out how to deal with it in a legal sense.
Right. Well, there was some reports that Chinese vehicles would still be cheaper if they were sold in North America with the 100% tariffs that Canada and the United States placed on them.
The cheapest one, would still be cheaper than everything in North America.
All right. Well, next week we are very excited to be launching our Patreon program for our listeners. This is a way that you can support us financially and get something in return. And some people may not know what Patreon is. Brian, you're pretty experienced. You support some things, I imagine, through Patreon.
Yeah, I've always loved podcasts. I'm a big podcast fan, and it's one of those things that can be directly funded by listeners. Like some things like, television shows and movies are so expensive, it's difficult to do that direct funding. But because podcasts are cheaper to make, they can often be directly funded by the listeners. And I think it's a fantastic model. There's 3 or 4 Patreons that I support of different podcasts and, YouTube channels and stuff. And I love it. I think everyone should support us.
It would be nice if people got behind it. It's, I think the way we have it set up, you can start from $2.50 a month American. And by the time you get to $5 a month, you get some serious perks, like we're going to offer a bonus episode every month. And it may not necessarily be about clean energy. It could be about, toilet plunging or something. I don't know. But our first episode is probably going to be us taking your Tesla for a full self-driving beta test to see how it's doing. And it'll be a lot more informal, but we will have a bonus episode a month for our Patreon members of certain levels. And there'll be a Discord, which my daughter is a Discord expert. She has a volunteer position with the California gaming company, and she spends more hours than I care to visualize on Discord. So she is a Discord expert. She set that up for us, and she will be an administrator, and sometimes we'll be on there and we'll respond to messages, and it'll be new to us, but we will have a Discord advantage for you if you, part of the community.
Yeah, I do know what Discord is in spite of my advanced age, and I've been on it a couple of times, and I think, I would try to make an appearance on there, depending on how. I'm just worried that, it'll be crickets in there. That,
well, it probably will be from time to time, but if you want, you can certainly do that. And supporting us supports, getting good information out about climate change and the solutions to climate change. And we hope you find that that's important. But nothing is going to change if you don't support the show. We don't want to take anything away from you. We're just going to give extra things to people who do support. And a lot of people have supported us through PayPal, whether it's like $2 a month or lump sum donations of like $100 or $200. You know, people will sometimes get generous, and it's a huge help. You are a Playboy jet setter, so I'm the person who's going to, you know, who needs the money, who needs to fix the siding on his house, who needs to justify this to my family, the amount of work that I put into this. So it helps. Every dollar helps. And it makes a bigger splash than you think it does with me. Like it, you know, it's huge. Like any donation at all to the show is huge for me. It helps me a lot. I've got a fund going for my car. It needs some suspension work on my Nissan Leaf. Let alone the heater, but yeah, that's not going to be solved with a Patreon. Yeah, so everything really helps.
Yeah, and none of the money goes to me because I'm good, but James does, you know, 99% of the work on the podcast of doing all the editing, which is really that's where the hours happen, and James does all of that, and he deserves to get paid for it.
Well, that's very kind of you. I also do the lightning round, and I have worked full-time on the show and beyond. Like, it is potentially a full-time job because of the promotion of it, putting clips out there on different platforms. By the way, our full podcast is now on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube.
And is that because we want to spy on everybody?
Yes. Chinese government. If only they would fund us. It seems like half of our stories about China now. I know a lot of people are probably sensing that, but yeah, that is where the advancements are coming from. So that's what we cover. Politics aside, it seems like a good thing for the world, especially, you know, there's a story at the end of the show today that's going to, you know, be mind-blowing about the result of what China is doing. And of course, we love to hear from our listeners. We love to hear your letters, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. You can still get back to us about Patreon. Is $2.50 too much as a starting tier? Patreon doesn't think so, but I see other podcasts with $1 a month or something like that. So maybe if you have any opinions on that, you can also leave us a voicemail online at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And like I said, there's a PayPal link. You can always do that. It's always going to be there for you if you want to use that. Not everybody does, but some people don't mind.
Okay, from Electriv, 3,000 charging stations headed for Pakistan. So this is from a Chinese investor group, ADM, and they've reached an agreement with Pakistan and 2 local companies to set up 3,000 charging stations for electric vehicles across India. And, you know, this is going to be quite a big deal. So $90 million US is what they're looking at for this so far. This ADM group, they're also hoping to eventually manufacture electric cars in Pakistan. So this is, you know, one of the, you know, India and Pakistan, one of the next frontiers for electric vehicles. So that's still not clear what's going to happen with that. But BYD has already announced that they're planning to set up shop and make electric cars in Pakistan and hope to be operational by 2026. And hopefully these charging stations would be available once this all actually happens.
Well, that's exciting news. You know, Pakistan is Pakistan is really taking off. You know, it's the 3rd largest importer of solar panels, and they're doing this very quietly because the grid has become very expensive there. It is another one of these places with a lot of 2- and 3-wheel transportation. So it's very exciting that they would, you know, suddenly get 3,000 chargers added to Pakistan, and hopefully they can decarbonize too. And take advantage. And you know what? Climate change is on people's minds there because of the deadly floods they had a couple of years ago. So that has a little bit to do with it as well. And also very costly to the economy.
And severe heat waves as well that have been very deadly.
All right, Brian, Microsoft is restarting 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor. You and I are old enough to remember 3 Mile Island.
I had to check the date and see if this was an April Fool's story that you were sticking in the show here. But no, this is real.
You hadn't heard about this? This is
no, I hadn't.
This is big news. Yeah, this is an actual thing, and it has to do with AI, something we've mentioned before, that there's anticipated huge power demands for AI. I use AI a lot in my podcasting. It is very useful to me. It even writes jokes when I can't. So, and by the way, I laughed pretty hard at that joke because I was so surprised. But then I tried to get it to write a joke for the other thing to see if it could improve it. It couldn't. this is your idea, adding jokes to the top of our show, and sometimes the topics we cover are not humor worthy, but so it can be challenging. Anyway, it's a $1.6 billion investment by Constellation, and Microsoft is the off-taker, so they're going to be basically a power purchase agreement, a 20-year deal to buy power from the 3 Mile Island reactor, which was shunted, by the way, a couple of years ago. It was retired. It was 40 years old. And the meltdown, I think, did that shut down one of the reactors permanently? I can't remember.
I can't remember, but that was, back in the 70s.
Yeah, so a long time ago. I was probably 13, 14 years old at the time. The plant was the site of the worst nuclear accident in U.S. history in '79. But the reactor being restarted is separate from that reactor and safe. So just one of the, I think, 2 reactors that were there, I assume. The deal will help Microsoft power its growing data centers, which need a lot of energy for artificial intelligence. And Constellation Energy, the plant owner, will invest $1.6 billion to upgrade the facility to keep it going for another 20 years, at least until 2054. So that's 30 years. Isn't it? 30 years from now? Okay, it makes sense, more sense. 30 years, it makes more sense than 20 years. Opening the plant could create 3,400 jobs. It's amazing how much, nuclear just doesn't sit there in a field and generate it. It requires a lot of people. And 800, well, I guess these are probably temporary jobs to upgrade it, but 800 megawatts of clean energy to the power grid will be added, which is the low end of a nuclear reactor. Microsoft says this move is important for reducing carbon emissions and helping with climate change. I'm a big fan of keeping nuclear reactors going if they're already there, if they can be extended. I'm not sure if I live next door to it, if I would be, I'd be happy that it's gone. And then now it's coming back, just as the risk, which may not be rational, but I'm not a rational human being, Brian, you know that. The accident at 3 Mile Island in '79 caused fear of nuclear energy around the world, but no one was hurt. And now there is more interest in it as a clean energy source, of course, but too little, too late, too expensive, too late, we don't know. There are other technologies in the world to compete. Other tech companies like Amazon are also looking at nuclear energy to meet their energy needs. Some people have protested the plant's reopening, but it still needs final approval from regulators. One of the biggest power deals ever, Brian. $16 billion for one nuclear reactor from a 40-year-old reactor just to get to age 60 or 70. We'll see. But, it's better than Microsoft buying a coal plant, I guess.
I mean, and they're going to have to wait a long time for it to open. So, I guess they've figured out they don't need the power for a few years. I don't know.
Well, they're doing it in advance, and I guess that's what you have to do. But yeah, that's the way it is.
Solar, wind, and batteries. That's what I would do if I was in that position. And speaking of which, there's a $1 billion solar and battery storage project that just broke ground in Utah. So this is going to be 400 megawatts, so half the size of that nuclear power plant, which ain't bad.
Okay.
Especially.
Let me just do some math here. It's $1 billion for half as much and $16 billion for twice as much.
Yeah, that's
so something's not adding up here. I don't know, Microsoft, maybe you need your AI to do some math, but it seems to me that you could do the same thing for at least, maybe if not $2 billion to power it around the clock. You could do something to, say half the price.
Yeah,
would certainly have the storage of if you mixed in some wind and solar. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I mean, Microsoft is a business, so presumably they have some accountants that know something about,
and what happens if the other guys do something that costs half as much? Then they're more profitable than you with this AI thing.
I don't know. It seems strange, but one of the things that really caught my eye in this article from Electrek about Utah, as recently as 2015, Utah was getting 75% of their power from coal. And they're already down to 46%, so half roughly. And then other projects like this solar and battery project is going to get that down even further. So I always like a story where we're getting rid of coal because it's such a no-brainer. But then the other thing I wanted to talk about, are you aware that there's now an NHL hockey team in Utah? Did you know about this?
Yeah, I did. And people were joking about them calling themselves the Utah Jazz like the basketball team did. Which is a stupid name.
Well, they should have done that. Well, do you know what their name is?
Bounce it off me. I'll see if I do.
It's the Utah Hockey Club.
No. Are you serious?
I'm serious. That's their name.
That's the final version of the best they could come up with.
I don't know how that ever got past
Utah,
anybody, but
you are not a creative species. Come on. You could have had a contest to come up with something better than Hockey Club. That sounds like an interim name.
I always thought Utah Jazz was a weird name. And by the way, John Stockton played for the Utah Jazz, famous basketball player, and probably distant relative of mine. But
could be.
But yeah, I always thought Utah Jazz, well, that's a weird name. I didn't love it, but that's a million times better than the Utah Hockey Club.
Yeah, it's just making the Utah Jazz thing seem like a good idea now. Okay.
So, go figure.
All right. Well, the Utah Hockey Club. I can't get over that. Let's get on. It's time for the Lightning Round.
Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
After China smashed solar and wind addition records for 2023, a key question would be, can China match that pace in 2024? Most people said no, not a chance. Well, China is beating it in 2024. It's beating its torrid 2023 pace for adding solar and wind. China additions are up, not just a bit. Not just a tick, but 27% over last year, which was crazy last year, and it's 27% more this year. That is through August and includes wind, which is 9% up. So good for them. Solar, though, still king. Decommissioning the UK's nuclear reactors will take 130 billion British pounds, and includes storied waste for hundreds of years. That price, 132 billion. I don't think we do the total accounting on some people say it's overblown, the storage costs, but you have to, I don't know. China's carbon market to cover steel, aluminum, and cement in 2024. If you're in the UK, it's aluminium. Aluminium. Say it for me, Brian. Aluminium. How did I say it?
Aluminium.
Yes, there. I did. We're now bilingual, this show. We talked about batteries lasting for decades on the last show. There is a big advantage to that with EVs. Why? Because increasing the life expectancy of batteries, even if they do currently apparently outlast how long the vehicle lasts, well, if you use those batteries more for vehicle to grid, then it's not a problem. People worry, well, if I charge my house and store up solar in my driveway on the weekend and with my car there and discharge it to the grid, selling it to the grid, I might make a little bit of money, but my battery will degrade. Well, if it outlasts the car, that's not a problem because you can use it. So the better batteries are going to make that even more viable now. And let's get to a CES fast fact. If you build a new nuclear reactor in Connecticut, it will now legally be classified as renewable energy. Your thoughts? Any thoughts?
Well, I guess that's technically not correct because uranium is not an infinite resource, but it is a lower carbon source. So I assume that they made this rule change to help further non-fossil sources. So, maybe it's all right.
Oh, let's have a bonus fast fact. 4 out of every 10 acres of corn in the United States is used to feed traffic. That's right. It goes into gasoline. And it's a really inefficient solar energy, corn ethanol. And so what percent of U.S. transportation is powered by this mighty corn ethanol that occupies 30 million acres of the entire U.S.? That's 1.24% of all U.S. land area is occupied by corn ethanol. 4% of transportation that powers 4%. The CEO of the world's largest battery maker, CATL, has a PhD, Brian. It seems weird because Musk, I'm getting the two confused now. Musk,
Same thing.
Musk dropped out of university and now he's kooky. He's believing in conspiracy theories. So maybe an education is important. Anyway, he seems completely reasonable and sane. This is something that someone pointed out, one of our listeners on Twitter. Musk, well, several, you know what CATL has? I was talking about how 21,000 battery researchers working around the clock, and this is how they are advancing their battery tech. Well, he, in this interview that was shown to me, it's actually hundreds of them have PhDs. These aren't just people working in a lab. These are actually doctorate people in battery chemistry and things like that. Yeah, so thank you, Honesty 2022, for sending that, and I've linked the video that he wanted me to watch in the show notes, I hope, as long as AI puts it in there for me. 2019 average battery degradation was 2.3% per year. That is, you lose 2.3% of your capacity in your battery. God knows my Nissan Leaf lost a lot of energy. I expected it to. I knew that in advance. A lot of them lose a lot in the first year, and it slows down by year 5. But 2024 battery degradation 5 years later is only 1.8%, and the degradation factor declined by 22%. And the best batteries now, Brian, degrade 1% per year, which is not bad at all. From BBC.com, Hinkley Point B nuclear reactor in the UK could take 95 years to decommission. That's a bit of time.
That's a long time.
Potential new car buyers who would consider buying a Tesla fell by nearly half since 2022, and the number who would definitely not consider a Tesla increased by nearly 2/3, according to U.S. surveys. They're destroying their leases and walking away, says The Hollywood Reporter. This is a publication I don't think we've quoted on the show before, but now they've done an article about how people in Hollywood are tearing up their leases and not driving Teslas because of the CEO. The Tesla sales have dropped 25% in the last quarter, according to that article. There is only one utility-scale coal-fired power plant in the world that uses carbon capture technology, and it is where Brian and I live. It is, what, 2 hours south of us, at Boundary Dam.
Because we love coal here.
You can't get enough of it. The government here yesterday said they were putting $10 million to help diversify the economies down there, but I'm sure they're pretty miserable about it. In rural Saskatchewan, where we live, they don't really believe in climate change at all. It only captures 57% of the plant's carbon capture. It's the only one functioning. It's the only one, and it's a terrible record of 57%. It's never hitting the annual 90% capture target that was set out, and it's over a decade old.
But that probably gets it basically roughly to equal to natural gas. Like natural gas, I think, emits about half as much carbon as coal. So at its best, it gets as good as natural gas.
But it's not as cheap as natural gas because that carbon capture and sequestration.
It was very expensive to install that. Very expensive.
Run. So Carrier HVAC, that is the maker of furnaces and air conditioning units, home air conditioning, central air conditioning units, will shortly launch new units of heat pumps that operate reliably, 100% capacity down to minus 30. So when you start getting cold on a heat pump, it doesn't operate at 100% capacity. It starts getting off, and they're saying that 100% capacity at minus 30 is pretty remarkable. Heat pump owner Brian Stockton says,
I think heat pumps work as much as 300 or 400% efficiency when they're working at their best. So at its worst, it's still 100%, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, and which is the same as bringing maybe an electric arc furnace backup on at that temperature as well.
Exactly.
But at minus 25 then, it should be a little bit more than 100% efficient, right? It should, not much, but enough to be better than turning on, say, like you have an electric arc furnace backup. Not an arc furnace, but an electric furnace backup.
Yeah.
Resistant.
Yeah, no, mine is supposed to work, my heat pump's supposed to work to minus 22 Celsius. And then below that, there's a 10,000 watt heater. So, where we live, it is more expensive for me to heat with electricity than natural gas. But that's only because it's, ridiculously cold. It's a few hundred, like maybe $600 more per year for me to heat with electricity, even though part of the time I'm using a 10,000 watt heater.
Okay, well, that might change. My concern is not too many people in the world live where we live and have our climate. And I've said it before, a lot of the people who are in northern climates, even though they're close to the Arctic, they are tempered by the ocean. We are not. And we get down to minus 30s sometimes and even down to minus 40 occasionally. And we have to be able to compete with it. So my worry is that they're not going to develop EVs. And they're not going to have to. But China gets pretty cold too. In the north part of China. So I'm hoping that the battery technology catches up to cold climates, because I'm hearing that in reports out of China in the news that they are improving that.
We're definitely an edge case, but I think there's so much development going on in heat pumps and batteries that enough of that will trickle down and have a benefit for these, outside edge cases of ridiculously cold like we are.
Okay, so the 600 plus gigawatts of solar in the world that will be added this year has the terawatt hour generation of 150 nuclear plants. So we are adding, basically 600 nuclear reactors at full capacity, but solar doesn't run at full capacity. It's something like 20 to 30%. So the terawatt hour generation, that is the actual output of the solar that is being installed, does compare to 150 nuclear plants this year. Now, there are 60 some plants being built, nuclear plants being built in the world, but they're not going to start operation until 5 or 10 years from now. So basically 600 gigawatts of daytime solar generation equals 150 nuclear reactors of round-the-clock generation. But solar is building the generation output of all those nuclear reactors that I mentioned every 4 months. So yes, there's 60 nuclear plants being built in the world, but solar is equaling that every 4 months. Meanwhile, we have to wait up to 10 years for those nuclear reactors, or even more. Quite remarkable, Brian, the solar story. At some point, it's got to peak. It will peak in different parts of the world at different times, but right now, it's on fire. And finally this week, 2 major international climate agencies predict global emissions have reached a critical inflection point in 2024. It could be the last year before we begin a decline in worldwide emissions. This is from ABC Australia. Both independent research firm Bloomberg NEF and the International Climate Analytics Institute say it is possible we will see global emissions fall in 2024, and 2023 will have been the peak of global emissions in our sordid history of the planet. We will know if these predictions have come true by the end of the year. Brian, it is quite remarkable, and we will be on that story should that be confirmed. But it's what we're all about. It's good news.
We will absolutely keep you posted. All right, that's our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, we're Clean Energy Pod. And we have videos of our show on TikTok and YouTube, including some special content. And look forward for special content from the Patreon in the future.
And if you're new to the show and you're listening on your podcast app, and we're getting a lot of video viewers now. It's starting to be a thing for us. So, but if you're listening, make sure you subscribe in your favorite podcast app, because we do put out shows every week, and you'll get those shows delivered to you. And we will see you next week.
See you next week.
The Clean Energy Show.